Hello everyone. Welcome to our overview of the Guerrilla UCD webinars. My name's William Hudson. I'm going to be walking you through this 1-hour overview of our 16 webinars, and I'll also be conducting all of the webinars themselves throughout the year. I'm a user experience strategist, at least that's what we call ourselves these days. It changes over the years. My main interest is in user-centered design, and our company is called Syntam Limited with a silent G, which seemed like a really great idea back in the 1980s when I chose it out of the dictionary, and then discovered that nobody actually memorizes the rules of English pronunciation. But it's a silent G, and if you ever need to reach me by email, it's william.hudson@syntam with a silent G .co.uk. So we have 16 webinars to cover. I'm going to give you a little bit of introduction to the whole thing, and obviously, given the time we have, a pretty quick overview of the individual 90-minute sessions that we'll be presenting over the next 8 or 9 months. So for today, we're going to have a very brief introduction to the whole concept, the whole series, and also look at the boot camp, and then a little bit later get into the first chunk of 5. We've separated these webinars into three main sets of 5: strategy, tactics, and then lean and agile, and I'll explain what each of these are about and go into the details of each of those. You will find that you have with the GoToWebinar interface a little question and answer panel, and please, if you do have questions, then please just type them in there, and the idea is that I will plan to look at those and address them at each of the breaks between these 3 main sections, plus a final Q&A at the end. Also, if anything occurs to you after the sessions, then do please feel free to email me with questions at that william.hudson@syntam.co.uk address, and I will respond as quickly as I can. I just wanted to talk very briefly before we get into the introduction about the motivation for these webinars and the whole idea of Guerrilla UCD. Guerrilla isn't obviously my term at all. Guerrilla Usability was coined, I think, by Jacob Nielsen. Certainly it was around and used by him back in the late 1980s, early 1990s. And it has been applied to usability and marketing and user experience and all kinds of things. But the main thing about Guerrilla UCD is that we really are focusing on the practical aspects of user-centered design, the stuff that really everybody should know something about and should be doing. And the motivation behind it, as I mentioned, or as I promised, is that usability still really isn't mainstream, certainly not in traditional software circles. It's much better known in the web side of things, but even then there are certainly web design houses not really taking usability very seriously. When usability is done, it's primarily as a testing stage at the end of the cycle, and as we know from all kinds of other industries, you can't actually improve the quality of something just by testing it harder. You have to do more than just adding more tests. Otherwise, you just end up with a increasingly large pile of rejects, or a very much larger amount of wasted effort. So that's the second big issue still with usability, even though we've been doing it now all these years. And the third is that even when companies do start taking usability somewhat more seriously, and they go out and hire usability specialists or user experience people and interaction designers, they don't actually seem to know how to use them in the process in order to get best effect, in order to give them the actual ability to improve the quality of the services and products we're building from the design stages onwards. So that's really where we're coming at this from, and I just wanted to let you know that that is really what we're trying to address to a large extent, the kinds of things that really the whole organization, the whole team should know about usability and the process called user-centered design, which is aimed at improving usability. I wanted to bring this to your attention. This is certainly was a big deal in the UK a little less than a year ago, about 9 months ago. It's an absolutely huge software project that's been running in the UK now for 8 years or so, and was cancelled by the new government when it got in last year. That wasn't the only reason it was cancelled, though, and this is this was the headline as of September 2011. NHS told to abandon delayed IT project, and it's a £12.7 billion project to computerize patient records. That's about 18 billion US dollars. It's an absolutely enormous amount of money to have been squandered away. And one of the main recommendations of the Public Accounts Committee, who is looking at the failures in this project, is just amazingly basic. And here's a quotation from it. I've given you bit.ly links to most of the things I refer to in this presentation. They're at the bottom of the page, and you should just be able to click on them and go off and have a look at these. If you've downloaded the slides from our Guerrilla UCD site, then those links should be live in the PDFs. Otherwise, they're actually very easy to type in, obviously. So here's the quotation from the Public Accounts Committee. The Health Department could have avoided some of the pitfalls and waste if they had consulted at the start of the process with health professionals. So here we go off trying to build a huge and very complicated system without even considering talking to the main users of that system. And I'm afraid that is actually pretty much par for the course for a lot of traditional software development still. Having said that, I'm aware that web development is really somewhat of a different animal, and certainly more is made of usability and so forth, but still user-centered design is fairly poorly served even in web development circles. The series itself is 16 long altogether, 17 including this one today, but 16 90-minute webinars covering a pretty broad range of usability, user experience, user-centered design, and agile topics. The focus, as I mentioned already, is on cost-effective methods. So we're not going to be going a whole 90 minutes on a method which might, on a good day with a following wind, give you a little bit of improvement or a little bit of purchase on getting a better product out the door. We're going to be focusing primarily on the things that really everybody ought to be doing. And a lot of this is aimed at the whole team, the idea being that if you're working with a development team in close collaboration, as you should be in an agile process, then they need to understand why we're doing this stuff. It's no good just having them writing code and wondering what's all this touchy-feely persona stuff about, or why are we doing these slightly weird things on Thursdays with people coming in and us trying things on them. So it's about trying to build up understanding and cooperation within a whole team. And that's, again, one of the aims of the series. We're going to be including slides for all of the series. They will be available generally the day before the presentation. And the recordings will generally be available 2 days afterwards, because there may be some editing and uploading involved. So the recordings, so if you miss a session, you can download the recording. They will be primarily for download. The recording today, because this is a free session, will be made very broadly available, and you will get an email reminder from, or an email follow-up, I should say, from GoToWebinar with a link to the GoToWebinar site recording, which will also be able to go to the Guerrilla UCD site and go to my webinars and log in there to download it. And you're welcome to share all these resources, the slides and the recordings, within your teams, but obviously don't repost them on the web. That is a little bit more generous than we had in mind. Here's the overall picture. So we've got our Getting Started section, which is this 60-minute webinar, and then the next session, or the very first paid session, in a little bit over 2 weeks, the Guerrilla UCD Bootcamp. We then have the 5 strategy webinars, and these are pretty broad in coverage, and really things that most people ought to know about who are involved in design and development of interactive systems. So we've got visual design, navigation design, designing for search engine optimization. Obviously this one is more targeted at the web and at intranets, whereas a lot of the sessions in general are broad based in the sense of working for web, working for desktop applications, working for mobile and so forth. And then the 5 tactics webinars follow on. So these are spaced out at about 2 weeks in between each. And they're also designed to be taken individually. So it's not like to take number 7, you have to sit through numbers 1 through 6. The primary aim is that you should be able to come in on any of these, although we do have a few suggestions in the website about what you might like to take as a prerequisite and what you might like to follow up with. The tactics webinars are a little bit more focused, so we have user-centered information architecture with card sorting, dynamic web pages. This is all about the effective use of Ajax rather than just making things more interactive for the sake of more interaction. Number 9, writing effective web and intranet content. 10, designing for advanced users. 11, persuasion, trust, and seduction. And then finally, towards the end of the year, these are November and December time, and these are spaced at 1 week intervals, a series of 5 lean and agile webinars. These are based on workshops that I've been running for quite a few years now at various conferences and also within organizations. And I'll talk about each of these in more detail in just a minute, but these are all based around really the process of doing user-centered design and how to fit that process into agile working with agile teams. So don't forget, if you've got any questions as we're going along, please use the question and answer interface you'll find in the GoToWebinar application that should be running on your desktops. And I'll get on to talking about all of these in more detail. A brief commercial message, just something about the cost of the webinars. Obviously, today's is free. Next week's is actually fairly inexpensive. It's half the price that the main webinars will be. The main webinars are priced at €66, 55 British pounds, or 88 US dollars. So that's the vast majority. That's 15 out of the 16 of that price. But there are some special offers. One is that if you pay for 4 webinars, you'll get a 5th one for free. So that means if you did want to book all 15 webinars, that you would actually get 3 of those for free. And the other special offer is that you will be able to earn free webinars if you're very active in social networking or just happen to have a lot of friends in the business. Then you can refer them and earn for every friend or colleague who actually buys at least one webinar, you'll get 1 for free. And the way that's done is just by visiting the site and typing your email address into this page, which again I've given you a bit.ly link at the bottom there, bit.ly/GUCD-refer. But that's at the bottom of the specials offers page, and you can type your email address in there and do a submit, and you'll get a bit.ly shortcut, which then you can advertise, and when people use that shortcut, you'll get credit for having introduced them. So let's look at getting started with Guerrilla UCD. So this is our Guerrilla UCD boot camp on the 6th of June, and all of these are running at 4:30 in the afternoon London time. I call it London time because for most of them it's British summer time, which nobody knows about, BST, and then later in the year, I think it's after the 3rd week in October, it's Greenwich Mean Time again, so I'm just calling it London time so that you know what we're talking about. And in this first session, we'll be looking at why you'd want to do user-centered design, the benefits of usability, a little bit about the international standard for human-centered design, and why we have so much trouble doing this kind of thing, why we can persist in treating software development and the user interface aspects as fairly separate problems, and how we could address those, and also some of the psychology of not only human-computer interaction, but also how we do this development and the kinds of issues that come up with developers in terms of understanding users' actual needs. That's something I call the empathy gap, and the solution to that, not surprisingly, is empathetic design. Here's a pretty straightforward example of a good old-fashioned usability problem. This is the kind of thing that people should be able to find and fix just by doing usability testing. It's Yahoo Groups. It's their current design. I happened to notice it when I was using it yesterday. And at the bottom of the first page of the Yahoo Group messages is a footer to reach the next page of older postings. But bizarrely, once you've done that, once you go to the next page, then all of the items in the footer change order. So you had the newest on the left on the original page and the oldest on the right, and then on all the subsequent pages it's the oldest on the left and the newest on the right. So that is the kind of thing that good old-fashioned usability testing would find, and hopefully the fix to this would actually be moderately trivial. But let's look at a somewhat more complicated issue, something where usability testing really just isn't going to tell you what you need to know. This was me trying to get to a customer in Munich, and although I was in Munich a couple of years ago for the UPA conference, this was only my second time, so I had an address and I was trying to find out how to get there. So Munich Transport have a very nice English version of their website, but the problem is that they actually expect you to know the geography of Munich. So there is no possibility in this particular interface, it's called the Ticket Navigator, of actually typing or selecting your destination in except from the map. So there are between 200 and 300 stations on this map, and you can't type them in. You can't go down here. You might see just under the map in the middle, we've got the word departure that will be filled in by the website once you've clicked on something, but you can't type in there. So what you have to do, what I had to do, is to go off to Google Maps and type in the destination, find it on a geographic map, and then try to work out where that would be on this schematic of the Munich transport system. So this is a perfect example of where user-centered design should have been applied, that somebody should have done some research with users. Notice this, as I mentioned, it is in English, and presumably that means that this site is actually aimed at visitors. There may be a number of English-speaking residents of Munich, but not a huge number. And so if the site intended for visitors who happen to speak English, then requiring that they actually know the geography of Munich is somewhat unreasonable. And I don't mean to pick on Munich Transport by any means. I have found this universally when I've tried to use public transport sites for various locations. I tried to do something similar in San Jose a few years ago and just completely failed again, that you needed to know where all these places were around San Jose in order to be able to use the site. Also notice that the print is not very large, and the zoom facility on this site is extremely limited. You have either this view or you have a view which is about a postage stamp size enlarged to the whole screen, so it would take you 20 or 30 clicks to get across the entire map. So altogether a somewhat frustrating site to use. And bear in mind this incredible eyesight requirement, because I had this issue with a project I was working on a few years ago, and I was so frustrated by what we kept doing to users that I had this cartoon drawn. It was drawn by a friend of mine who illustrates children's books. So if you've got school-age kids and they're using a UK reading scheme, then you may well have seen something like this style somewhere else. But this is the Ellie Camungle bat, which I've called the perfect user. It's a combination of an elephant, camel, monkey, eagle bat. And this is the kind of user we design for when we don't think about users at all. So if we just assume that they'll be able to read text on the screen regardless of what size, if we assume that they'll be able to remember where they are in the system without adequate feedback, if we give them strange, as my colleagues were doing in this particular project, strange combinations of mouse and keyboard interactions in order to do more advanced steps, then this is who we end up designing for. Nobody actually sets out to do this. I'm not trying to suggest that there are developers out there who are actively thinking about this. It's just that if we don't think about users, then we do end up developing things for this kind of individual. There's also some research that I've done. I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail about it now. I've done a paper at a couple of conferences on this, and I talk about this in the boot camp. It's the fact that men in particular have an issue with respect to technology and their empathizing skills. This particular chart is showing two measures that are used in autism research, systemizing skills and empathizing skills, SQ and EQ respectively. And I did this survey of a very large number of people working in IT and discovered that as the respondents indicated that they worked more towards the technology end of IT rather than the people end. That's what this scale at the bottom of the chart is about, technology on the right and people on the left. Their empathy scores took a very significant dip. And what this means is that the technologists are really good at building and understanding systems and really bad at not understanding that other people don't work like that, that other people may be really challenged by the technology and don't have the systemizing skills that are necessary to overcome this. I should just quickly add that in the normal population, these two quotients are entirely uncorrelated. There is no correlation whatever between EQ and SQ, empathizing and systemizing, in the general population. It only becomes interesting like this predominantly in men and predominantly in people involved in science and technology. And I'll talk more about that in the boot camp. So what I'd like to do at this point is stop and give you some time to ask questions. I know we haven't got that far, but I also wanted to use this time to ask you to take a little poll here. So let me just get the poll up, and in the meantime I'll have a look through any questions that we already have. So here comes the poll. It's a very straightforward one. And I will, in the meantime, have a quick look at the questions. Will you send out your presentations once you're done? Well, the presentation is already available on the website. So if you use the information that you got when you registered to visit my webinars, you will have a very simple login, and you'll see that there's a link for about a 5 megabyte PDF of the presentation. What GoToWebinar will do, the website itself, is it will send you out an email in the next 24 hours with a link to the recording, but not necessarily the, not the slides. So if you've got any questions, do please use the question interface to ask those. In the meantime, I will, since we seem to have voted, I will show you the results of the poll, which show that we are predominantly UK and Ireland at the moment, 73%, 10% North America, 10% Latin America, and 10% just rounding for Western Europe. So let's move on to the strategy webinars. So the first of the strategy webinars is on visual design on the 21st of June, and here we're going to look at some of the basic issues to do with visual perception. People are really not as predictable as you might think in terms of how they understand information presented to them visually. So there are quite a few issues there. There's a wonderful issue that's been known about for years called banner blindness, which most web designers know about, but there are very many related issues that we need to talk about. We also need to talk about the importance of layout and the use of grids, and how to use colors, fonts, and general design skills, general design tactics, I should say, images and so forth. We'll also be looking at form design. My friend Caroline Jarrett's written a book on form design. We're going to have a quick look at some of the topics that she discusses, predominantly around the placement of labels and so forth. And of course, page size and how it affects people's ability to see what's going on. Here's a very brief example of something called Greeking, where you take a design and you turn the text into gobbledygook. And I wrote an application that you can use on the web called GreekThis.com, which takes a website or a web page and turns the available text into mush. The only problem with it is that it isn't very clever. It gets a lot of requests from the web servers about what kind of device are you and so forth, and it doesn't answer any of those questions. So Amazon is one of the few sites that will still actually send a properly formatted page under those circumstances. So it needs a bit of work. If anybody would like to assist on that, it's written in PHP, but I haven't actually been anywhere near it in a few years, unfortunately. So that's one issue, and this was a topic of research by a guy called Tom Tallis, and Jacob Nielsen wrote about it a few years ago. And it works very well for trying to help people to understand page layout, or try to ascertain how they understand the layout that you've designed. We'll also talk about the use of color, and I know that branding is a really big issue for a lot of organizations. I certainly came across this when I was doing a lot of work with intranets, that company brand rules would say you must use these colors for these things, but unfortunately they were very rarely designed with digital media in mind. So although we've got this wonderful array of colors here, very few of them are actually suitable for text. The dark purple of Yahoo, the dark blue of Facebook and Intel would work, but anything in yellow is almost guaranteed not to work on a white background. You could use it on black, for example. So we need to have a look at color and the use of things like color contrast tests to make sure that we're using color appropriately. Number 3 in the series is navigation and menu design, and this is all about getting people to their goals and looking at how that's done and the terminology that we use for that. We'll also be looking fairly briefly at somewhat newer design approaches like mega menus, how to do those well, and how not to do those well. We will be talking a little bit about accessibility, and we will be looking briefly at designing menus for mobile devices. Here's a wonderful example that IKEA keeps perpetuating. This is actually a very new screenshot. I took this just the other day. And you still can't find bedside tables on this page. Partly it's the light blue text is very hard to read, but mostly it's because by default the all products listing is by function. And it's very hard to actually ascertain the function of a bedside table. So if you change that to department, you then get a completely different listing. But notice that we have on the right-hand side here under living room, we've got about 30 or 40 items in no particular order. So obviously that's just going to be very difficult for people to wade through. And bedside tables do appear here, not surprisingly under bedroom, but quite some way down this list, and not on this first screen. That's by department. We'll also be having a look at faceted search or faceted navigation as a very powerful cross between traditional navigation and search-based navigation. And this is an example of that's often used of Nobel laureates and provides a nice walkthrough of the principles of faceted navigation. We'll be having a look at that and some of the principles involved in that in this particular session. Number 4 is designing for search engine optimization and accessibility. So this is the one that I mentioned is very specifically web focused, and the combination of SEO and accessibility can seem a bit strange to people, but in fact it's because both SEO and accessibility is to a large extent, not entirely, but there certainly is a very heavy focus on making sure that your web pages can be automatically processed either by a web crawler, which is what a search engine uses, or by assistive technology. So we'll be having a look at that, and we'll also be filling in other parts of the accessibility picture, because it isn't all about making HTML processable by this technology, but perhaps 2/3, 3/4 of it is about that topic. So web crawlers and assistive technology for disabled users are both interested in the naked HTML describing a page. So if that doesn't make sense to a web crawler, if that doesn't make sense to assistive technology like a screen reader, then bad things will happen. And at the moment, dynamic pages, and we'll talk more about this in the Ajax session, but dynamic pages are challenging to assistive technology as well, because there's no mechanism for letting assistive technology know that pages have changed. That is slowly coming into use. It's a new standard called ARIA, Accessible Rich Internet Applications, and most browsers now support it, but regrettably not a lot of websites yet support it. So this is something we'll talk about and that you'll be aware of after this session. Also, just to mention, in case you're wondering why you should be interested in accessibility, is that there have been some fairly high-profile cases, and perhaps the most expensive one of those is a few years old now, but it was Target supermarkets in California who were sued to the tune of $6 million for not taking their responsibilities to not discriminate against disabled people more seriously. And that is an issue in the vast majority of countries. I'm unaware of any countries that don't have some rules, some laws that say that you mustn't discriminate against disabled people. Here's an example of where the accessibility issues are more than just valid HTML. This was from a very well-known multinationals website, public-facing website. And this particular image in the middle had the descriptive text, the alt text, girl riding bicycle. So if you couldn't see the screen, then that was what was read out to you. But what in fact it led to was a report of the company taking over a shampoo manufacturer, which obviously is very different from a girl riding a bicycle. And I find this as a common problem with web authors or intranet authors too, and content editors, that they often are describing what's in the picture rather than what the picture is meant to represent. So that's something we'll talk about in that session. Session number 5, human error, messages and feedback, on the 2nd of August, and we're looking at the basics of human error, slips versus mistakes and so forth, how to prevent them, how to plan for them, and how to help people to understand the state of systems without interrupting them too substantially. So that's the topic of feedback flow and attracting attention, and of course the vexed issue of error messages and when to produce them and what they should look like. This is a photo from somewhere very near Chernobyl. This is actually a village called Pripyat, which is where all of the workers at Chernobyl were housed. the curious thing about Pripyat is that it's now appeared in at least 4 different computer games as a rather eerie setting. But the whole Chernobyl incident was a fairly large mistake, a misunderstanding about the state of the system, and even a reluctance to believe that anything bad could happen, because the Soviet authorities were very good at suppressing bad news about nuclear power. So one power plant did not know about problems that occurred at other power plants, and that's how Chernobyl happened. And of course, nuclear power plants are very large and complex systems with very large and complex user interfaces, and this is an example which might be from 3 Mile Island. It's hard to find anyone willing to say definitively that it was, but these apparently are the controls for raising and lowering the control rods in the nuclear reactor. And because they were so similar, the operators replace them with beer taps. So we've got Heineken on the left, and I believe that's Michelob on the right, but you can't really tell from this rather grainy black and white photo. But this is out of Don Norman's Design for Everyday Things, but you'll find other places referring to it on the web. This is one of my favorite error messages in the world. This happened to me some years ago. I understand that the bank in question has actually spent quite a lot of money on their user experience since then, but absolutely no clue given to the customer as to what about this form has not been completed correctly. It turns out there should have been a leading 0 in the I think this is the account number that started with a 6. It should have started with a 06, but a really excellent example of how not to word error messages. And Microsoft have a really nice collection of things that you should not do, which I've referenced here. Various of these are actually not errors. Some of them are errors, but worded very inappropriately. The one in the bottom left-hand corner, for example, you have entered an illegal object name character. It is making the user sound pretty inept and perhaps leading to all kinds of distress on their part. Certainly, given that these are red X's and we have messages like program removal failure, which is actually a fairly ordinary state to be in, making users believe that things are much worse than they really are. On the 16th of August, we have a session on usability evaluations. There's more in our toolbox than straightforward user testing, so we'll be looking at a wide variety of different approaches and when they might be used, when one approach is better than another. One that I've developed, for example, I spent many years benchmarking intranets, and I then extended this benchmarking process, which is based on a very large number of heuristics, extended it to e-commerce sites. So here we have an example of a particular site which is doing very poorly on its checkout design, but pretty well, very well on its accessibility. This whole chart is based on around about 80 different heuristics that we look at on a typical e-commerce site. And also A/B and multivariate testing. This is from a nice article at Smashing Magazine that I give a link to at the bottom, showing that version A of the page was tested with users on the left and version B with users on the right, and the version B page led to significantly more, 50% more sign-ups than version A, so version B is a clear winner there. And of course, the issue with A/B and multivariate testing is that it can tell you which design is best, but it can't tell you why that is. So we might still end up needing to use good old-fashioned usability testing or user testing for the detail. Also, in some cases, especially if you're working with a team with low UX maturity, you might need to express things in a way that they're perhaps more accustomed to. So this is something called a fishbone diagram or a Ishikawa diagram from quality assurance circles, and it's a way of explaining how errors occur. So poor conversion rate here is the net result, and the legibility, navigation, trust, and page layout are all contributors there. Okay, so we have another section coming up, so I will repeat the process of before, asking you if you've got any questions, and also giving you a quick poll. So here's our next quick poll, if you'd like to have a look at that, and while that's up, if you'd like to think about any other questions. Someone else asking about getting a copy of the slides, and yes, if you simply follow the link that you would have received when you registered for the webinar, if you went through the Guerrilla UCD website, then you'll find under My Webinars that you'll get you'll have a link to the slides there. And if you're having any trouble with that, then just email me, william.hudson@cintam.co.uk, and I will do my best to either solve the problem for you, if all else fails, to send you a copy of the slides, although 5 meg may be challenging for some email systems. Okay, well, most people have voted, so let's have a quick look at the results from that particular poll. So this was about your primary job role, and here come the results. We are 78% usability and user experience people, 11% management, and 11% other. So predominantly user experience and usability, which is not too surprising because that is predominantly where the Guerrilla UCD webinars were advertised. Okay, let's move on with the slides. So we're moving into the tactics webinars now. So these are a little bit more specific in terms of, or a little bit more focused in terms of the processes actually involved. So this number 7 on the 30th of August is card sorting, and it's based on workshops that I've been running for quite a few years now of various lengths. I run this as a half-day workshop. I just ran it at the Chi conference in Austin a couple of weeks ago as a half-day workshop. I've run it also as a whole-day workshop. But this is going to be just a 90-minute overview. We're not obviously going to have a chance to do card sorting, but we'll talk about the basics. We'll talk about how to do card sorting face-to-face, and also how to do it on screen, and some of the common problems and how to make sense of the results. So here's an example of a card sort being done on paper using our CAPS, computer-aided paper sorting method, which allows you to pre-print the cards with a laser printer and use a barcode scanner, fairly inexpensive barcode scanner, to process the results pretty quickly and easily. But it also can be done online, and these are two of the very common sites for online card sorting. There are quite a few, though, around, but websort.net on the left, I believe they've changed their name in the last few months, but I don't recall what they've changed it to. Websort.net will still find it. And then Optimal Workshop on the right-hand side used to be Optimal Sort. And they have all kinds of benefits as well as drawbacks. Really, it's harder to do certain things with online sorting, especially if what you want to do is get a really good understanding of that particular problem domain. So we'll talk about that in that particular session. Also using our tools, certainly our package, SynCaps, which stands for Cintam, computer-aided paper sorting, we can do some interesting analysis, such as this particular one from an intranet, which is showing with the black central part of each cell where that item is on the current design. So here we have a travel group at the top of this chart, and these are all the possible pairings of the items that people sorted. And we can see that travel expenses wasn't actually put with the travel group, but that's where it appears on the current design. So these black cells are showing that this is where travel expenses is organized in the current design. So this is something which is appearing effectively in the wrong place, and the data that we've got now from this kind of analysis would tell us that we should perhaps put travel expenses in both the travel group and the expenses group. And we'll talk about that kind of analysis in that session. Session 8 on the 13th of September, we look at effective use of Ajax, so making pages more dynamic, but at the same time assisting usability, and also making sure that it works on nice things like tablet and other mobile platforms. But also we look at the basic principles of Ajax, and also the issue of change blindness, inattention blindness, various blindnesses there, flow, and a little bit more discussion on search engine optimization and accessibility. I do look very briefly at a worked example showing you how the HTML and the JavaScript all interact to make it possible. Obviously the focus is on the difference from an interaction point of view between a standard page request, which we see here, where the browser is responsible for interacting with the server, and the Ajax-based style of request, where we have some code doing processing in the background, and we now are responsible for dealing with the outcomes of that particular interaction. So what happens, for example, if the response is not timely? What happens if there is no response for that particular information request, and so forth? So we talk about that in the Ajax session. On the 27th of September, a session on writing effective web and intranet content. So this is primarily aimed at web and intranet authors and editors. And I spend a fair bit of time talking about readability, which is not a very popular subject. Some people think that readability isn't the right approach. It certainly shouldn't be the basis of how you write. It's just a very useful way of measuring it, or measuring your colleagues' submissions to the Intranet, for example, to tell them that they must provide material that's over a certain score in terms of readability, which certainly Intranet managers have found a very useful approach. This was a wonderful quotation I found on a multinational, very well-known household name. Absolutely complete gobbledygook, this particular sentence. It's about 30 or 40 words long, and it gets a flesh readability score of 0, which means that it's virtually impossible to make sense of. And I think if you have a look at that, if you download the slides, I'm not going to read it out to you, but it is absolutely horrendous. I did a study of about 30 intranets and measuring readability scores, and discovered that if companies put their mind to it, they could definitely improve the readability of the content on their intranets. This is all material that was meant to be for general use within the organization, so readable by anyone from office cleaners up to VPs and board members. So it was important that it should be readable. But I did discover that companies, small companies in particular, who put their mind to it could certainly improve readability, but multinationals did seem to have a very pronounced tendency to write gobbledygook. So we'll talk about that and how you might address that. On the 11th of October, a session for advanced users, designing for advanced users, and here we look a little bit more deeply into HCI, human-computer interaction issues. We talk about the keystroke level model and also Fitts' law, and some interesting research has been done and interesting tools that are produced, like this one from Carnegie Mellon called COG tool, where you can actually use the tool that they provided to help you to compare user interfaces. But we'll talk about how you can do that just with pencil and paper too, or even something as simple as a mouse odometer. You install this piece of software on your PC, and it will measure how far your mouse has traveled. And we'll talk about why this is interesting and how it could be important in determining whether your design is particularly effective for advanced users. Session 11, Persuasion, Trust, and Seduction. This is all about trying to get people to do things. A lot of it's based on e-commerce, but obviously there are many other places that persuasion and seduction are important, not to mention trust. And we'll look at that whole set of topics, and also some research that I did when I've been doing user research for customers on something called users' emotional journeys, and how that can be measured and the kind of results we get from that. So our final poll and final chance to ask, well, it's not the final chance to ask questions, because we're going to have a question session at the end as well. But let me just show you this final poll, because this is always an interesting topic. So what is the usability UX, the usability or user experience to developer ratio in your organization? I've had some extremely interesting answers to this question when asking it in the classroom. Okay, about a third of you have voted. If you could just quickly click on one of those items, I promise you will find the results interesting. About half voted now. %60 voted. Okay, well, that's a minute, so I will show you what we got. 69% voted now. Okay, quickly, if you're going to do it, do it. Okay, we'll close this poll. We need to press on. So here come the results. We have a third of you showing one usability or UX person for every 1 to 24 developers, which is really excellent. I mean, that's the kind of answer I would like to see. Another third of you say 1 for every 50 to 99 developers, and then the next largest is kind of no UX people at all, or maybe only 1 for the whole organization. And certainly, I am aware of single people, solo UX departments, 1 person to 200 or 300 developers, and it's a fairly grim situation to be in, I guess, although very challenging too. So that's interesting. Thank you very much for that, and we'll press on with this last tranche of webinars. Okay, so on to the Lean and Agile webinars. So these last 5 are a lot more about process. And also about how to do these user-centered design, usability, and user experience things in an agile working environment. So number 12 on the 8th of November is really aimed at UX people, user experience, user-centered design, and usability people. And it's about how to make the case for user-centered design, how to demonstrate your worth, how to really sell user experience to your colleagues, especially in what I'd call a low UX maturity organization. So it's about understanding your audience, understanding how to present information, what information to present, and how to make a persuasive case so that your management, your colleagues, your accounts department are all on board with you doing this. This is trying to explain the relationship between fairly traditional, what you might call waterfall approach. I've called it here OO, object-oriented at the top, user-centered design in the middle, and agile at the bottom. And this isn't meant to be a timeline. It's meant to be the problem to solution continuum. So at the left-hand end here, we're dealing with trying to understand the problem, and at the right-hand end, we're dealing with building the solution. So it is related, obviously, to the timeline, but it's not necessarily the same thing. And the big challenge we have, of course, is that these things in the UCD chunk, or a very large number of them, are traditionally, or have been traditionally, performed up front and before the rest of the projects got going. And of course, that just doesn't fit into agile working. So we'll be looking at that. primarily in session 13, which is about integrating UCD and Agile. And we'll be looking at where Agile comes from, and a lot of these tensions between Agile and user-centered design, trying to look at things like doing usability evaluation in Agile time and so forth, and making user-centered design the focus of the whole process, which is obviously much, much easier said than done. So to really understand this, you have to be conversant with a number of interesting animals. I'm not going to tell you about this just now. You can type in any of these words along with Agile and find out that they are really relevant. So go to Google and type in Agile skunks, Agile chickens, or Agile pigs, and you will discover what this is about. But I'm going to leave this as a mystery until later in the year. The approach predominantly used these days by people who say they've had good success from doing UCD in Agile is called the parallel streams approach, and it was written about, I think, I'm not sure whether Desiree was the first person to write about it, but her paper is one of the best known. Desiree C., who I had the pleasure of meeting at CHI just a couple of weeks ago, and she talks about this parallel streams approach. And the big and complicated issue here is that the UX team, or the UX members of the Agile team, are working both one cycle ahead and one cycle behind the development team, and obviously that's quite challenging, but we talk in more detail about how to address those challenges and some of the important issues about how you do some of these things, like, for example, these connecting lines between the UX stream and the development stream are deliberate. That should try to engage the development team in the whole process so that we have a lot more collaboration, a lot more empathy and understanding about why some of these things are necessary, rather than just disgruntled muttering about these funny persona things that we like using. Speaking of which, session 14 on the 29th of November is all about users and personas and why personas are important. We know that they can work when used appropriately. We don't necessarily know why they work, and I've done some research into that, and I've got a section on what I call the psychology of personas. And then we're going to look at behavior-based personas in particular, how roles, which developers are very happy to talk about, fit in with personas and how to use those in combination, and also some interesting design ideas from John Pruitt and Tamara Adlin at Microsoft called persona-weighted feature matrices and design maps. So psychology of personas is a lot around this issue that our brains are wired for empathy with small numbers of people, that we really do react very differently in those situations than we do to large amorphous collections of things, especially when we are calling them very abstract names like users or user communities. So we'll talk a bit more about that and some of the evidence behind that. And then we'll be looking at these design maps. This is an example of a design map here, and how they can really be the focal point of user experience design in an Agile project. Session 15 on the 6th of December, use cases, user stories, and scenarios, and how all these tie together. And really this whole 90 minutes is about requirements and how to do it effectively, how to do requirements gathering and research for user-centered design, and also the role that use cases have to play. A lot of Agile shops are still using use cases, I find, even though Agile methods like Scrum are predominantly about user stories. And it's not that that's wrong in any way, shape, or form, but you really do have to understand the benefits and drawbacks of the two different approaches, and how use cases themselves can be adapted to be agile, and how to carry that off. So here's a use case diagram, pretty traditional, but the role that they have to play in agile methods as well. So finally, number 16 on the 13th of December, looking at conceptual models, and this is something I've been working on for a long time, and think that we really should be doing much more about in terms of user-centered design. And while I was working on this, I discovered that IBM had a method called OVID, Object Views and Interaction Design. And I borrowed some of their concepts and adapted them to a method of working so that the conceptual models are not something that are completely separate from the mainstream development, but they are actually just another tool in the user-centered design arsenal for making sure that you're focusing on real users and their needs. And here's just a couple of examples I'll show you briefly. This is a kind of model that developers like to produce. This is what might be called a domain model in UML terms, Unified Modeling Language. But the problem that we have with these is that they're really much, much more complicated than a user's conceptual model. This is actually for an elevator or a lift, whereas the user's conceptual model looks more like that. It's only got a handful of items on it, a call button, which you'd recognize, a floor selector, which is how you choose where you're going inside the lift, and so forth. So we're talking about just looking at what things in the user interface users need to be aware of and interact with. And this is a similar example. You can ignore the funny diamond-shaped things. They're not absolutely essential, but this is just really a block diagram of Amazon. Departments have products which have product descriptions. Baskets contain selected products. Orders have ordered products, and so forth. So that session is about how to use the concept of conceptual models, the idea of conceptual models, in helping you to build robust designs. So that is the whole of the overview. So if you have any final questions, now would be the time to ask them. Or, as I mentioned, if you want to email me, the details I think are on the following slide. If I've done this correctly, yes, they are. So do visit Guerrilla UCD. You can either spell Guerrilla the American way with one R, you can spell it the European way with two R's, or if you get completely confused, you can spell it as the animal, Gorilla. They'll all take you to the same place. You can use our special offers page to earn free webinars from referrals if that appeals to you. And once you're on the Guerrilla UCD site, you can use the My Webinars page to access the slides, including today's slides, and also the recordings when they appear, and any other resources, but primarily the slides and recordings. And finally, as I mentioned, my email address is william.hudson@cintam.co.uk. So I will just check that we haven't had any final questions, and we have not. So it just remains for me to thank you for listening, and do let me know if I can be of any help. Thanks very much.